If only they knew. It needs to be more ponderous. If only they knew. Our lives are hell. Let's talk about movies. Hellraiser Judgment. On the one hand, this will be a review of the latest Hellraiser movie. On the other hand, considering there is not much one can say about this movie without talking about the overall 3 decades long phenomenon of Hellraiser, this is honestly not much more than a slightly justified segue to talk about the franchise as a whole.
Just say, I love Hellraiser. I want to talk about Hellraiser.
I want to talk about Hellraiser, yeah.
Say that you love it.
I love Hellraiser. I love it. I love Hellraiser. Give me Hellraiser. So, let's get this one out of the way. Hellraiser Judgment. Barely a movie. Not sure how to grade it. Not sure how to properly review it. Exists in its own universe of depraved quality. And I use that word very tentatively. At 77 minutes long since credits, it is a very stripped down experience. 3-act structure is basically non-existent, which is, not necessarily bad. In fact, since we are so overfed with this clear-cut and glaring 3-act structure beats, it can be considered a positive aspect of this film. It begins somewhat strong. No, scratch that. Strong is a wrong word. It begins intriguing. Intriguing is a more sensible word for this. Without delving into spoilers, the first 15 minutes of Hellraiser Judgment lays out this idea of hell as a Kafkaesque realm with a very twisted sense of bureaucracy. Pretentious movie connoisseur would say there is a zeitgeisty social commentary buried somewhere in there, but that is without taking into consideration the other 65 minutes of this film. And boy oh boy do things go down the drain quickly after that first sequence. First of all, representation of women. It's bad. It's very easy to fall into that trap of judging any representation of anything based on purely superficial scrutiny without taking into account the wider context of what a picture is trying to say. However, this malign representation of women is not done in that, oh, isn't life full of insidious strangers way? No, the first movie is a perfect contra-argument to this, because it has a conniving, extremely malicious and prominent female character that simply works. She works so well, in fact, she has become an iconic character in the roster of cult horror personas. My impression about Hellraiser Judgment was that the director had no idea how detrimental this portrayal of women was. There are no good characters in this movie, male or female, but certain solutions in regard to a female character that appears straight after the intro and a very particular angelic figure. Not to delve into overt spoiler signaling is what really communicates a lack of self-reflection on the director's part. It was misjudged. I find this to be really unfortunate because Gary J. Tunnicliffe sounds like a really stand-up guy in interviews. Of course, he is not a newcomer to the Hellraiser franchise. He served as the creature effect supervisor and artist ever since the commercially successful Hellraiser 3 Hell on Earth. His tumultuous journey with the franchise is actually very interesting, so if you're intrigued about behind the scenes info, pop over to the Midnight's Edge channel and listen to the extensive interview he gave to the channel. Is that the proper way to say it?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Midnight's Edge, awesome channel. Anyways, Hellraiser Judgment falls apart in the middle section and it is completely derailed by an ending that looks more like a scuffle between upper and middle management in a fascist corporation than the ecstatic climax of a grindhouse exploitative horror film. Now, considering the general lack of budget for this film, such middle ground solutions are not uncommon or they're not a surprise. And they are probably deliberate. Kudos to Tunnicliffe for trying to do something different. There are glimpses of something interesting here. There is potential, and I think the fledgling writer and director should be given another chance to hone his craft. This idea of hell as this oppressive existential bureaucratic nightmare is an intriguing one. And ultimately, I think this is exactly the element Tunnicliffe tried to recapture from the original two films, the intrigue of Cenobites. However, paradoxically, though this process of explaining how certain things work, and especially due to this revelation of the business collaboration between heaven and hell, the intrigue is exactly what ended up on the chopping block by the end of the film. But the franchise still has potential. It always has potential. In a way, Hellraiser is a phenomenon unlike any other in the horror world, and to be honest, beyond that, it is the only franchise that consistently and bravely marches on. It has entered its fourth decade now. This is mind-boggling. Side note, entered its fourth decade without rebooting it. Nobody could have predicted this, let alone Clive Barker. In 1987, the original Hellraiser was such an underdog movie, unlikely to succeed, yet it was so lauded upon release. The artistic polymath Clive Barker adapted and authored this very grungy, extremely malevolent little movie with thematic ambitions worthy of Dante Alighieri's work. And the sequel, which was not written or indeed directed by Barker, followed suit with a broadened canvas and greater ambition. It had an incredible orchestral soundtrack by Christopher Young, which is still one of my all-time favorites, and the theme melody befit of the movie's demonic inhabitants and the sprawling hellscape that is very original. Now, things started to go downhill with the third movie in the series, and this is by no means a secret. Sure enough, it has a satisfying scenery-chewing performance by Doug Bradley and a tight pace, but the general direction of the themes ended up in a banal territory. This is why it pains me that the fourth movie came out like a raped cabbage. Because it had ambition to return to the biblical proportions of the first two Hellraisers. It covered such an expansive time frame, from Baroque mansions of the 18th century France, a backdrop that practically tried to elaborate upon the origins of the Lament configuration, to the 19th sensibility cyberpunkish retro-futuristic idea of the distant future, where the last descendant of the toymaker's family tries to destroy Cenobites once and for all. The photography in the fourth movie is sublime, and Doug Bradley's Pinhead never looked better, thanks to no other than Judgment's director, Gary J. Tunnicliffe. I think the fifth movie is the last one worth mentioning, directed by Scott Derrickson, who was launched into the stratosphere of Hollywood's hip directors due to his gig on Doctor Strange. It was essentially an unrelated horror thriller screenplay repurposed into a Hellraiser story. It is a competent film with Angel Heart vibe. The franchise then veered into direct-to-video territory. I mean, it already did after the fourth movie, but this time with a procession of repurposed scripts and half-ass productions as Doug Bradley braved through the questionable movies, unwilling to part with his career-making character. Everything fell apart with Hellraiser Revelation, which you can hardly, with even the best intentions, call a movie. And this is exclusively the fault of the production company. It was made on an impossibly minuscule budget over the span of several weeks. So after they butchered his script for Revelations, Gary Tunnicliffe took it upon himself to course correct the franchise. And the first result is better than all the movies after the fifth one. New Pinhead is pretty good. I can totally buy it. Tunnicliffe pretty succinctly described the actor Paul Taylor as having the aura of Peter Cushing and Ray Fiennes about him, and I think that's a candid description. Please, Gary, just give us better drawn female characters and more of the eloquent auditor in the next movie. Final grade, I don't know, 1.5 stars? 2 stars? 1.5 stars. Well, it isn't good, but the first 15 minutes are a really solid Hellraiser short that leaves an impression, but the rest of it is just a mess. If you can find the intro scene on YouTube and just watch that, you've seen the best this movie has to offer. You were pretty silent tonight, baby. Pretty silent. She is passively aggressively ignoring me.
Ever since the Black Panther review.
Yeah. Don't even mention it. Don't. It's a taboo topic for us here. Can't talk about Black Panther. Can't talk about it.